I never believed in urban legends. I always thought horror stories were just that, stories. But when my brother Noah disappeared after entering Waverly Hills Sanatorium, everything changed. He and his friends decided to break into that filthy building for fun. A stupid bet, typical of boys who think they're invincible. But Noah never came back. The police found nothing, no clues, and after a week of searching, they gave up. But I didn't. That night, I was determined to find out what happened. The sanatorium was a monstrosity of rotting concrete, a massive building with broken windows and gaping doors, like an open mouth inviting me inside. The cold wind whistled through the hallways, carrying the stench of mold, rust, and something else, something rotten. Every step I took inside that place made the wooden planks creak beneath my feet. The flashlight trembled in my hand as I moved forward, forcing myself to ignore the distant whispers that seemed to echo through the peeling walls. I convinced myself they were just drafts moving through the corridors, but my heart knew better. Then I saw it. On the opposite wall of the hallway, a large cracked mirror reflected the surroundings. But something was wrong. Very wrong. In the glass, a woman stood behind me. Tall, slender, wearing a torn and filthy black dress. Her face wasn't entirely visible, but her eyes, those eyes were two hollow voids, deep as if they could suck my soul into them. My breath caught. I spun around in an instant, shining the flashlight behind me. Nothing. I swallowed hard and looked back at the mirror. She was still there. But now, closer. My instinct screamed for me to run, but my feet were glued to the floor. Then, something changed in the reflection. Her smile began to widen and widen until it nearly split her face in two. Her thin, jagged teeth looked like blades. Her head tilted slightly to the side, as if studying me, waiting to see what I would do. The glass cracked. The fracture spread across the mirror like a spider's web. She was trying to get out. In a desperate impulse, I threw the flashlight at the mirror. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the hallway like a scream. The reflection shattered into dozens of pieces on the floor. My heart pounded so hard I could barely breathe. But then I realized. In the shards of glass scattered on the floor, her eyes were still there. Each fragment reflected a part of her face, all watching me from different angles. Some whispered. Others smiled. And one of them moved. The flashlight flickered. The rotten stench grew stronger. The air turned dense, suffocating, and I felt something cold touch my shoulder. I didn't look back. I ran. My lungs burned as I ran through the dark hallways of the sanatorium. The dust-covered floor and scattered debris made my feet slip with every step, but I couldn't stop. She was behind me. The rotten smell clung to the air, like decayed flesh left in the sun for days. My fingers trembled as I clutched the flashlight against my chest, forcing myself to ignore the feeling that at any moment, cold hands might wrap around my neck. I turned a corner and found myself in a long corridor. The doors to the old patient rooms were all slightly open, like hungry mouths waiting to swallow me. The echo of my footsteps seemed to be followed by others, lighter, dragging steps. I forced myself to look ahead. I couldn't hesitate. If I stopped, she would catch me. But then, my heart froze. At the end of the hallway, a large fogged-up mirror reflected my image. And in it, I wasn't alone. The woman stood behind me. This time, her silhouette was clearer. Her skin was grayish, her eyes black voids, and her mouth still stretched into that distorted smile, as if her own skin had been pulled almost to the point of tearing. Her tattered black dress floated slightly, as if submerged in invisible water. She didn't move. She just watched me. But then, one detail made my breath hitch. Her feet weren't touching the ground. My vision blurred for a second. I couldn't blink. I couldn't look back. But I also couldn't keep running toward the mirror. I was trapped. The sound of glass cracking pulled me back to reality. The fractures began to spread across the reflection like a spider's web. Each snap echoed through the corridor, like bones being crushed. I tried to step away, but the sound stopped. The mirror went silent. Then I realized. In the glass, my reflection wasn't following my movements. My breath faltered. The Emily in the mirror was frozen, motionless, while I trembled with terror on the outside. Her eyes stared directly at me, and her mouth, once closed, began to open. Slowly. Very slowly. She is coming. The words came from my reflection's mouth, but they weren't spoken by me. It was the voice of a child. High-pitched, distorted, as if multiple voices spoke at once. The glass shattered. Shards flew through the hallway, and a shadow leaped out from inside the reflection. Something cold and sharp grazed my face, and the stinging pain made me stumble backward. I reached for my cheek and felt the warmth of blood trickling down. And then I saw her. This time, she wasn't in the mirror. She was here. With me. Her black void-like eyes pierced through me, and her mouth kept stretching, unnaturally wide, revealing thin, razor-sharp teeth. Her black dress dragged across the filthy floor, her pale, bare feet floating inches above the ground. She leaned forward, and a chilling whisper filled the hallway. "I see you." My muscles finally reacted. I turned and ran. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly. The air grew heavier, as if an invisible force was trying to pull me back. The doors to the old rooms began slamming shut one by one, a loud, dry sound reverberating through the entire sanatorium. Then, the last door at the end of the hallway swung open by itself. And what was inside was not an exit. The door creaked open with a haunting sound, revealing a room with rusted walls and a floor covered in shards of glass and broken wood. In the center, an empty, filthy examination table. The air was thick, thicker than ever, as if the very atmosphere was being consumed by the presence I felt watching me. She was there. I knew it. My heart raced as I hesitated at the entrance, the flashlight trembling in my hands. I couldn't escape. There was no turning back now. The corridor seemed distant, as if the entire sanatorium had distorted itself into an endless maze. I was trapped. And the woman, the entity, was the key to this prison. The shadow appeared before me, like an extension of the walls around me. She materialized slowly, her black eyes fixed on mine, the wide mouth, the weathered skin. I knew what she wanted. She wanted to consume me. Not physically, but in a much more horrific way. She wanted to devour me from the inside, erase me from reality. And in that moment, everything made sense. This sanatorium, the fog surrounding us, the muffled screams, the feeling of being watched. It was all part of her. She wasn't a lost spirit or just some monster. She was an ancient force, a vortex of darkness that fed on the souls of the innocent who entered here, creating an eternal cycle of suffering. You should have never come here. Her distorted voice pierced my chest like a blade. I tried to step back, but my legs wouldn't obey me. The feeling that something invisible was pushing me forward was overwhelming. I was trapped, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally. She was dominating me. She got closer, and I could feel her cold breath brushing against my skin. The words were stuck in my throat, but before I could do anything, she raised her hand, and I was thrown backward, crashing into the wall with a thud. The pain in my head was instant, but it was the sight in front of me that paralyzed me. Before me, the reflection was no longer mine. It was the reflection of the entity, her distorted figure staring at me with a satisfied grin. She was in the mirror. She was inside of me. The last thing I heard before I passed out was the sound of glass shattering, followed by a deep, almost imperceptible whisper. "Now you are mine." The light went out. When I woke up, I didn't know how much time had passed. The sanatorium was silent. The darkness enveloped everything, but something had changed. I wasn't alone anymore. She was inside of me. I could feel her presence, as if she were watching from every corner of my mind. I looked into the mirror and saw my reflection, but I was no longer the one looking back. The distorted smile of the woman was there, now complete. I was no longer a prisoner of the sanatorium. I was a part of it.